Greetings and salutations, everybody. It's XLJtheOG from Cold TV coming at you with another episode of Back in the Day. Now, on Back in the Day, we take a look back in the history of World Championship Wrestling, which is so rich. And to kick us off this week, we're going to talk about our top story. Now, our top story this week wasn't really a top story back then. But if you look back of it in the historical context, it's a pretty amazing moment that happened in World Championship Wrestling that very few even realize actually happened. Now, I want to go back to the year 1995. And at the time, the WCW United States Championship was up for grabs in a tournament that was held on World Championship Wrestling television that would culminate in the finals at the Great American Bash of that year. Now, one of the matchups early on in the tournament would see Macho Man Randy Savage go up against Stunning Steve Austin. That's right. It is the one and only encounter ever between two of wrestling's biggest superstars, Macho Man Randy Savage and Stone Cold Steve Austin. So they actually would meet on a May 11th episode of WCW Saturday Night in a quarterfinal matchup of the United States Championship Tournament. The match itself was fine. It wasn't anything spectacular, but just looking back, it's just so crazy to think that like these two mega superstars from different eras actually did meet one-on-one, and there is video proof of it. And the fact of the matter that this is the only time they ever met is just so crazy. Now, of course, immediately after this, pretty much, Steve Austin would find his exit out of World Championship Wrestling, would then go to work for ECW for a little while, and then join the World Wrestling Federation back in 1996. And, well, the rest, they say, is history. But our big story of this week is the encounter between the Macho Man Randy Savage and Stunning Steve Austin, part of the United States Championship Tournament in 1995. Now, this week's match of the week that we're going to take a look at is probably maybe the greatest matchup to ever take place on Monday Nitro history, at least physically in ring, and of course with the significance behind this matchup. This week we're going to take a look at a matchup from the October 4th, 1999 episode of Monday Nitro, and I am talking about the matchup between Bret the Hitman Hart and Chris Benoit. I'm sure as many of you know, Bret Hart's brother Owen passed away earlier this year in 1999 at the Over the Edge pay-per-view when he tragically fell to his death in a horrible accident gone wrong. And that happened in St. Louis at the Kemper Arena. Well, it just so happened to be this particular episode of Monday Night Nitro was taking place in the same arena. But what was unheard of at this time is they actually allowed them a 30-minute time limit slot of programming on Nitro. That's right. Who would have thunk it? 30 minutes of actual wrestling on Nitro? Oh, and it's good? Oh, and it gets over? Wow. But just the significance of this alone, just wanting to put on a tribute for one of the all-time greats in Owen Hart in the very same arena that he passed away. And it truly was an awe-inspiring, great moment, a technical masterpiece, just grapple for grapple, hold for hold. Arguably two of the greatest to ever come out of Canada, regardless of what you will say with Chris Benoit and, you know, all that. But still, a hell of an in-ring competitor. And this matchup is just amazing. Just a back and forth. Goes over about 25 minutes. But, of course, Bret the Hitman Hart would pick up the win. And just an emotional night, an emotional moment in the history of professional wrestling. And this matchup, if you've never seen it, go back and watch it. Try to watch it on whatever format you can, because it's just an awe-inspiring matchup. Now, here on Back in the Day, we always like to take a look at a great rivalry. And there's been all sorts of great rivalries all throughout the history of World Championship Wrestling. This rivalry I want to take a look at this week, personally, is one of my favorites as a kid. I loved the Natural Dustin Rhodes. In 1994 to 1995, he would have his hands full with Colonel Robert Parker's stud stable. This feud just goes, it's amazing how long this feud went on for. And it was just like a plethora of different wrestlers and talents were all involved in these matches. But it really kicks off right around like April of 1994 with Colonel Parker's newest asset to the stud stable, Bunkhouse Bunk, making his debut in WCW and immediately targeting and going after Dustin Rhodes. And these guys would have some tremendous chemistry together and have some brutal matchups in WCW. Now, the in-ring chemistry between Bunkhouse Buck and Dustin Rhodes is one that I don't think gets mentioned nearly enough. These guys could go at it, man. They had some bloody, brutal succession of pay-per-view matches back-to-back. It kicked off at Spring Stampede, where Dustin would go up against Bunkhouse Buck in a bunkhouse match, which was just pretty much no rules. And they just beat the living hell out of each other. And Bunkhouse Bunk would pick up the win. Now, next month, they would meet at WCW Slamboree in a bull rope match, which Dustin's all the more known for, especially with his lineage, considering his father was a huge participant in bull rope matches all throughout the years. And this would just be another bloody, violent war right there in Philadelphia. Now, this feud gets upped one as Terry Funk would come out at the end of this matchup and beat the crap out of Dustin Rhodes and would, in fact, join Colonel Parker's stud stable. So now Dustin Rhodes was waging war with not one but two very violent and very hateful men who was out to get him. And thus, he needed a tag team partner, but he didn't really have anybody to turn to. So Dustin was lost without a partner going to war against the stud stable. He needed some help. And he would turn to a rivalry of sorts as Arn Anderson would step up to the plate and say he would be Dustin Rhodes' tag team partner. And thus this led to the Bash at the Beach pay-per-view, where Dustin Rhodes teamed up with Arn Anderson to go up against Bunkhouse Buck and Terry Funk. Now, all throughout this matchup, Dustin takes a beating from Terry Funk and Bunkhouse Buck. But finally, he gets that hot tag, makes it to Arn Anderson. Arn gets in the ring, and then what happens? He turns on Dustin. Should have seen that coming. So this war with Dustin Rhodes going against Colonel Parker's stud stable is just like the numbers are just building against Dustin Rhodes. And it's just like he's outnumbered 3-1. It's like, in addition to, you got to keep in mind, Colonel Parker's got his bodyguard Ming with him as well. So it's just like, how in the world are you going to beat these guys? And what would be one of the most emotional promos of all time, Dustin Rhodes' father, Dusty Rhodes, would return to World Championship Wrestling and would step up to the plate and tell him, in a very passionate promo, just almost like years of pin-up, emotions coming out in this promo, but ultimately telling Dustin that he would be his partner. And he just needed to seal it with a hug and his kiss. Still one of the most tear-jerking promos of all time. Matter of fact, even Cody Rhodes will tell you he can't watch this promo because it brings him to tears. So Dusty would make his in-ring return to World Championship Wrestling, teaming up with his son Dustin at a Clash of the Champions, where they would meet Terry Funk and Bunkhouse Bunk. Now, of course, this didn't even up the sides because you would still have Arn Anderson as part of the stud stable as well. And like I mentioned, the bodyguard Ming was there too. So the Rhodes family knew they were going to have to enlist some help, and they were just going to have to downright get nasty. And that's exactly what they did, as they would enlist the Nasty Boys in their rivalry with the stud stable. And this would lead to the WCW Fall Brawl War Games event. Of course, War Games, the match that Dusty Rhodes created himself, as they would go to war against the stud stable. Now, interestingly enough, the stud stable in this matchup consisted of Colonel Robert Parker actually competing, joining up with Terry Funk, Bunkhouse Buck, and Arn Anderson. Going up against the Nasty Boys, Dusty Rhodes and Dustin Rhodes. Thus, the Nasties, Dustin and Dusty, would have their revenge and would win the War Games matchup. Now, you'd think this would be the end of the rivalry for Dustin, but not quite. He still had to exact some revenge against Arn Anderson, who turned on him. Now, they would both meet at Halloween Havoc 1994, and Dustin would get his revenge by defeating Arn Anderson. Now, you'd think this feud would finally be put to bed after this, considering, okay, Dustin's gotten his revenge. He's beaten Arn. He's beaten Bunkhouse. He's put Colonel Parker down. No, it continued on still somehow, as Colonel Robert Parker's latest acquisition would be the Blacktop Bully, played by Barry Darsow. Blacktop Bully and Dustin Rhodes would meet at Super Brawl 5 of 1995, where the Blacktop Bully would defeat Dustin Rhodes. Now, the end of this rivalry would come at WCW Uncensored 1995, as Dustin Rhodes would meet the Blacktop Bully in a King of the Road match. Now, you may be scratching your head, what is a King of the Road match? Well, essentially, it is a match that occurred in the back of an 18-wheeler in a trailer. Not a great matchup, not gonna lie. Pretty terrible, actually, in fact, but there's not a whole lot you can do when you're wrestling in the back of an 18-wheeler. But it is quite the spectacle and a unique matchup nonetheless. Now, there was a lot of controversy that come out from this matchup, as Dustin Rhodes and the Blacktop Bully, Barry Darsow, would get in trouble from management because there was blood in this matchup, which there was a rule at the time of no blood in WCW. Jon Moxley would not last long in WCW back then, just saying. So, thus, ultimately, both wrestlers would be let go and fired from their contract in WCW, and ultimately that would be the end of this rivalry. But the rivalry itself was pretty interesting throughout the year of television on WCW. It started off really with a great bang. There was some highs and some lows, but definitely more so highs. Maybe it didn't have the greatest finish to end the rivalry, but man, it was a good one nonetheless, and you got some incredible matchups and that amazing promo from Dusty Rhodes. And because of that, that is this week's Rivalry of the Week, is that of Dustin Rhodes against Colonel Robert Parker's Stud Stable. Now, if you follow me on TikTok and the social medias, you know I'm a huge collector of wrestling magazines. I have quite a bit of them in my collection, as well as several from World Championship Wrestling. We got a magazine we're going to look at this week for WCW, and that's the 1998 Year in Review. Let's check it out. Okay, you see Goldberg on the cover here, and rightfully so. What a huge year. 1998 was definitely the year of Goldberg. Well, let's check this out. And here's kind of a year in the review, a little synopsis here. You can see DDP. There you see Goldberg at an Atlanta Falcons game. Oh, Dean Malenko. Man, 98 was such a great year. There's so many different rivalries. You can't forget that rivalry between Dean Malenko and Chris Jericho. Was so awesome, man. And here it kind of breaks down what happened in the month of January of that year. There you see Sting. At the time, there was some controversy with the World Heavyweight Championship being up for grabs. Even though Sting won the title at Super Brawl, or did he win it at Super Brawl? They held their WCW Sold Out pay-per-view at this month as well. There you see Bret Hart and Ric Flair, and what would be Bret Hart's first WCW matchup against the Nature Boy. Also, there was a rivalry going on at the time between Scott Hall and Larry Sabisco, of all people. Here are the results from the WCW Sold Out pay-per-view. Some good matchups here, man. There's the infamous Kevin Nash Giant matchup where Nash powerbombs the Giant and pretty much breaks his neck. Lex Luger against the Macho Man, and Bret Hart against the Nature Boy Ric Flair. Breaks down what happened in the month of February. There you see, believe it or not, yes folks, that is Rick Martel, who had his last run in wrestling was around this time frame. In 1998. And there you see Scott Steiner would turn on his brother at Super Brawl and join the NWO. A big story that month. And speaking of Super Brawl, here are results from Super Brawl 8 of that year. And Sting would beat Hollywood Hogan in the main event to win the World Heavyweight title. Now let's take a look at the month of March in 1998. And there you see it. My favorite wrestler is Eddie Guerrero airbrush shirt that they talked about here on World Championship Wreckage's episode, talking about the rivalry between Eddie and Chavo Guerrero. If you haven't watched it, check it out now. And that month was the WCW Uncensored pay-per-view with results from that show. Now, it's kind of a double main event. There was Sting against Scott Hall for the world title, and this would be Scott Hall kind of cashing in his World War III opportunity from 1997 when he won that matchup. And the Macho Man would take on Hollywood Hogan in a steel cage match. Somehow it ended in a no contest, but it's WCW. And here we talk about the month of April in World Championship Wrestling. And you can see right here, it does talk about the accident where Buff Bagwell was nearly paralyzed on that WCW Thunder episode. Also, this would be the month, this would be the time where Bill Goldberg would win his first singles championship. He would defeat Raven for the United States Championship. And now it's talking about the Spring Stampede pay-per-view. Look at some of the highlights here. Booker T and Chris Benoit. You got Goldberg and Saturn was an amazing matchup. Not an amazing matchup is the baseball bat on a pole match with Roddy Piper and the Giant against Hulk Hogan and Kevin Nash. DDP losing the U.S. title to Raven, but remember Raven would drop it the next night to Goldberg. And in your main event, the Macho Man Randy Savage would defeat Sting for the WCW World Heavyweight title. Now, the month of May was interesting because going in that Slamboree pay-per-view that year, Eric Bischoff was publicly calling out Vince McMahon for a match at Slamboree that year. Also, you had Dean Malenko win the Cruiserweight title as he would pose as wrestler Cycloplay in the Cruiserweight Battle Royal. Fit Finlay with the World Television Championship. Also, there you'd see a returning Chris Kanyon to World Championship Wrestling. He would take off the Mortis match there. The rivalry continuing on between Eddie and Chavo Guerrero went on as well. Also, the WCW Bruce Cruise took place around this time as well. And there you see the Disco Inferno apparently playing some table games at the casino on the boat. Here is your Slamboree 98 results. And there you see pictures of the Cruiserweight Battle Royal we talked about. The Bowery Death Match with DDP and Raven. Goldberg against Saturn for the U.S. title. Those guys always had great matches too, by the way. Bret Hart against the Macho Man. And the main event was the tag team titles with Sting and the Giant defeating the Outsiders. And the big thing with this is Scott Hall would turn on Kevin Nash, because this is the height of the rivalry between the NWO Black and White and the NWO Wolfpack, which you will see as months progress here. Now here we have some highlights in the month of June. There you see Sting going all in on the NWO Wolfpack, baby. Great American Bash. On this show, you had another incredible matchup with Chris Benoit and Booker T, which that rivalry is discussed here on World Championship Wreckage on an episode discussing the Best of 7 series between those two. Very uninteresting matchup with Hollywood Hogan and Bret Hart against the Macho Man and Roddy Piper. Chavo wrestling Eddie Guerrero on the show, and in the main event, Sting would beat the Giant for the tag team titles because they were because they were partners. It's a long story. It's WCW. Now we're moving on to the month of July, and July 1998 is very historic because it would be when Goldberg would win the World Heavyweight Championship on WCW Monday Night Nitro. Also, the rivalry between Diamond Dallas Page and Karl Malone against Dennis Rodman and Hollywood Hulk Hogan will be going on at this time frame as well. The stuff with the Steiners still going at it, which went throughout the year. And Chris Jericho just tearing it up this year too as well. What a year he had in 1998 in WCW with WCW Monday Night Jericho. And there you see Chavo Guerrero Jr., who would have his head shaved because he'd lose a matchup to Eddie Guerrero. And here we have some Bash at the Beach 98 results. Of course, it would be headlined by that Hollywood Hogan and Dennis Rodman against Karl Malone and DDP tag matchup. And we've got some foldouts here as well. Here you see Conan. We got Goldberg. Looks like a foldout here of Sting. Now we move on to the month of August and what happened with World Championship Wrestling. And you can see the feud between Jay Leno, that's right, Jay Leno, and Hollywood Hogan and Eric Bischoff would culminate in a matchup at Road Wild, a tag matchup that we would like to forget. Goldberg still continuing his undefeated streak. The Ultimate Warrior, the Warrior, returning to wrestling and challenging Hollywood Hogan for a matchup. And the Jericho Security, because who can forget that? Such a great time and era for Chris Jericho. And we've got results here for the WCW Road Wild pay-per-view. It was a fun little pay-per-view. And the month of September would be heating up in World Championship Wrestling, as you'd see Billy Kidman kind of come out of his shell and win his first Cruiserweight Championship. The war between the NWO Hollywood and Black and White still was going. And the newest incarnation of the Four Horsemen was born. And here we see results from the WCW NWO Fall Brawl War Games event from that year, which was headlined by the War Games matchup itself, which was probably the weirdest interpretation of War Games maybe ever, with 3 different teams of 3 men. And it was really like the winner would get a title shot, just whoever got the pinfall. It is just a weird matchup. All right, now the month of October, we finally get that showdown between the Warrior and Hogan you'd all been wanting to see. Psych. But an incredible matchup between Diamond Dallas Page and Goldberg would take place at Halloween Havoc. And yes, Judy Bagwell would become a World Tag Team Champion. And here we see results from Halloween Havoc 1998. Interesting year. This show, very interesting because it's the notorious show that went way over on time, and they had to cut the main event off, which is crazy because the main event's the best matchup, and arguably probably Goldberg's best matchup he had in World Championship Wrestling as he going up against Diamond Dallas Page for the World Heavyweight Championship. And here we are talking about the month of November in World Championship Wrestling. You see Bam Bam Bigelow returning to WCW. Hulk Hogan would go on to The Tonight Show, even though he was trying to kill Jay Leno a couple months later. Thus, he would declare that he would be running for President of the United States. Dear God, why? And here we go with your World War III results. And this would be held in Auburn Hills, Michigan. And ultimately, Kevin Nash would be the winner of the World War III matchup. Rounding us out for the year, let's take a look and see what happened in the month of December. And yes, we got to talk about this eyesore. And no, I'm not talking about Bischoff versus Flair either. Kevin Nash being the one to defeat Goldberg and end the streak. Here's results from that Starrcade of that year as well. And like I say, Goldberg would end up getting beat by Kevin Nash and would lose the world title. And also you had that god-awful Bischoff-Flair matchup. And here's some picks throughout the year of 1998 with WCW wrestlers with different celebrities and personalities. Now we go to the Readers Awards, where your Wrestler of the Year is Bill Goldberg. Match of the year was Goldberg versus DDP from Halloween Havoc 1998. But this Cruiserweight of the Year would go to Kidman. Your Tag Team of the Year would go to the Outsiders. A little controversial here considering they broke up, but once again, it was this or Rick Steiner and Judy Bagwell. I think I'm going with the Outsiders. Announcer of the Year would go to one Bobby the Brain Heenan. Your Writer of the Year, as well as Personality of the Year, would be Conan. Now, by Writer of the Year, there would be different wrestlers who'd have articles contributing to World Championship Wrestling magazine, and Conan just happened to be one of those wrestlers. And can we talk about that FUBU belt and those corduroy pants? God, I love the 90s. International Star of the Year would go to Chris Benoit. The Reader's Choice Award for Manager of the Year would go to Arn Anderson. Your Rookie of the Year would be Ernest the Cat Miller. Somebody call his mama. And look at this. Runner-up of the year was Chris Jericho, who was like, look at that face, number one. But runner-up in a lot of these categories. And here we got a DDP and Bret the Hitman Hart color photos. And there you see the rest of the covers from WCW Magazine that year. 1998, the year in review of WCW, is our magazine of the week here on Back in the Day. And finally, we always like to highlight a product here on Back in the Day in World Championship Wrestling's history. And I want to talk about another notorious product. Does everybody remember the WCW Nitro Cologne? Yeah. Why in God's name this was a thing, I don't know. What I always remember most about this cologne is there was a segment at Halloween Havoc of 1999 where Medusa would come out in a bikini with the Nitro Cologne and was like modeling it and stuff. And Bobby Heenan just talking about how like god awful the smell was, and she would dump the cologne all over him. That's what I remember about this the most. But this was the day and age where you can market just about anything. So I don't think they sold a whole ton of these. Of course, now they're worth a lot of money because people want stupid shit like this. But as far as like reviews on like what the actual scent was, I've heard it's pretty basic, pretty standard. Definitely not worth the money they were asking to shell out for this. Just so weird to think of a wrestling company having their own cologne, but this stuff did exist. So there you go. And that's going to wrap it up for this week's episode of Back in the Day. And hey, if you're not doing so, click that like and subscribe button right now and check out all the amazing shows here on World Championship Wreckage's YouTube channel. And hey, if you like that, why don't you head on over to Cole TV and check out our channel as well. It's where we have all sorts of amazing wrestling content. We've got weekly shows, including Pro Wrestling 60, as well as Learning the Ropes, and a ton of other shows on there as well. And this week on Cole TV, you can catch a replay of our Colecast episode where we are talking about fast food. That's right, we have a Tournament of Champions crowning what is the greatest fast food item out there. Also, you can catch a brand new episode of Learning the Ropes. And all this month, we are talking factions. This week's episode, we will be talking about D-Generation X. And you can also catch Pro Wrestling 60 every Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where we talk about what happened that week in the world of professional wrestling. Well, once again, that's going to wrap it up for this episode. Hope you have all enjoyed. And as always, please don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. Until next time, I'm XLJ the OG, and we will see you back here for another episode of Back in the Day.